In a quiet suburb of Chicago, Illinois, lived a woman named Margaret Johnson, 67 years old. Once a respected middle school principal, she was remembered by many teachers and students as a strict but fair educator. Past the halfway point of her life, she lost her husband in an unfortunate accident. At the time, she was just 41 years old. Her only child, a daughter named Emily, was still in high school. From then on, life was a struggle. She went to school early every morning, spending her evenings catching up on lesson plans while still making dinner, doing laundry, and making sure to check in with her daughter. "Thanks, Mom, for everything," was something she never heard. But her daughter's well-being was Margaret's only source of strength. As time passed, her daughter went on to college in New York City, eventually passed the bar exam, and now leads a busy life as a lawyer. "I'm so proud of her," she would say, but deep down, she always felt like she was watching her daughter walk further and further away. After retiring, Margaret lived frugally on her Social Security payments. Every month, she sent approximately $500 to her daughter from her $1,500 monthly income, simply wanting to help with childcare expenses. Phone calls and texts were rare. There were no words of gratitude. But she never blamed her daughter. She couldn't quite believe that her role as a mother had ended. Late at night, when the house was quiet, Margaret would sit in front of a photo displayed in the corner of the living room. It was a picture from her daughter's wedding. Her daughter, wearing a beautiful white gown, was smiling radiantly. Beside her, the groom wore a slightly nervous expression. And on the edge of the photo, a small image of herself. Smiling, but positioned just a bit too far to the side. The placement tugged at her heart. Looking at the photo, she quietly asked in her heart, "Do you still consider me family?" Up until a few years ago, she used to look after her grandchildren during the summer vacations, reading them storybooks, going to the park. Just hearing their little voices calling her grandma filled her heart. But recently, those opportunities had dwindled. "We're busy. Daycare is enough. Parenting is different these days." Each word had a thorny edge of rejection. "I don't ask for much. I just want to be needed. All fine." The murmur, unspoken, dissolved into the air. And again, alone in bed, she would wonder, was I helpful today? Can I be more of a mother's tomorrow? That was what quietly sustained Margaret Johnson, a silent prayer that she kept hidden from everyone. "Little Michael is starting middle school this year. Maybe there's something I can do to help." With that thought, Margaret made a phone call. The recipient was her only daughter, living in New York City. She wanted to speak to her after all this time. "I was thinking I could help Michael with his studies. I used to tutor kids, you know. Orim fake." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Then, her daughter spoke in a somewhat amused tone. "Thanks, Mom, but times have changed. These days, it's normal to spend around $700 a month for tutoring. I don't think a retired school teacher can keep up." Margaret felt a sharp pain in her chest. She wanted to say, "It's not about the money. It's about wanting to be there for my grandson." But the words caught in her throat. "I see," she managed to say. "Well, just let me know if there's anything I can do." "Sure, Mom, thanks." The line went dead. Margaret sat alone in her quiet living room, the wedding photo catching her eye once more. The smile she wore in the picture felt like a mask, hiding the loneliness that gnawed at her heart. "Treating someone as elderly, huh?" she muttered to herself, the words echoing in the empty room. It wasn't just about the tutoring. It was about feeling useless, unwanted, and dismissed as someone whose knowledge and experience were outdated and irrelevant. That night, Margaret couldn't sleep. The thought kept replaying in her mind. Am I just a burden to my daughter? Is that all I am now? She tossed and turned, wrestling with years of unspoken feelings. The sacrifices she had made, the love she had poured out, the constant worry and support, had it all been for nothing? As the first rays of dawn crept through the curtains, Margaret made a decision. She couldn't continue living like this, constantly seeking validation and affection from someone who clearly didn't need or want her in their life. It was time to take control of her own happiness and well-being. In the coming weeks, Margaret consulted with a lawyer and made significant changes to her will. For 30 years, she had patiently endured her daughter's indifference, always hoping for a closer bond. But after being dismissed as old and out of touch, she decided it was time to formally cut ties with her daughter with a simple notification. She started by canceling the monthly 500 transfers to her daughter. Instead, she invested the money in a small travel fund. She had always dreamed of visiting the Grand Canyon and Yellowstone National Park. She also reached out to some of her former colleagues from the middle school and joined a local book club. For the first time in years, Margaret felt a sense of purpose and belonging that didn't depend on her daughter's approval. One sunny afternoon, Margaret received a call from her daughter. Emily sounded frantic. "Mom," the bank called and said you canceled the monthly transfers. "What's going on?" Margaret took a deep breath and spoke calmly. "Emily, I've decided to use that money for myself. I'm going to travel and enjoy my retirement." There was silence on the other end. Then, Emily's voice rose in anger. "How could you do this to me? I was counting on that money." "You're a successful lawyer, Emily. You don't need my money," Margaret replied, her voice firm. "I've spent too many years putting your needs before my own. It's time for me to focus on myself." "You're being selfish," Emily accused. "You're treating me like I'm nothing to you." Margaret paused, her heart aching. "Maybe," she said softly, "maybe I'm just finally learning to treat myself like I matter." And with that, she hung up the phone, a mix of sadness and relief washing over her. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, Margaret felt a glimmer of hope. She was finally free to live her life on her own terms, without seeking validation from someone who couldn't see her worth. Just then, a chill went right through Eleanor's heart. Oh, right. Times have changed. Mom's way is old school. It was rejection, carefully wrapped and subtly delivered. "Okay, I understand. Good luck with everything," she said, and hung up the phone. For a long moment, she just sat there, holding the receiver, unable to move. That evening, the doorbell rang. It was Carol, an old friend and former colleague from the school district who lived in the same condo complex. They'd taught together for years and stayed close even after retirement. "I brought some tea. Mind if I come in and chat for a bit?" Eleanor led her into the living room, and they sat together with their teacups. Eleanor found herself telling Carol about the phone call with her daughter. "I offered to help Michael with his college applications, but she said, he's got tutors for that now. I know things change, but it just felt a little lonely, you know." Carol was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke softly. "Eleanor, have you noticed? When was the last time little Michael said he wanted to come visit Grandma's house?" Eleanor felt her breath catch. She thought back, trying to remember. It had been over 2 years since Emily and her family had visited from New York. Before that, they'd come for Thanksgiving and Christmas. But lately, it was always, "We're too busy," or "Someone's not feeling well." And eventually, they just stopped calling altogether. That night, Eleanor sat down at her desk for the first time in ages and opened her diary. Hesitantly, she picked up a pencil and wrote, "I didn't want to just be loved. I wanted to feel needed. Today, I learned that was just a fantasy. There's nothing that cuts deeper than a silent dismissal. And when love is refused, all that's left is your own dignity." I came to learn that today. A few days later, she found an envelope in her mailbox. It was a notice from the city about the reopening of the Senior Community Center. Eleanor used to volunteer there, teaching reading to underprivileged kids. But the program had been shut down because of COVID, and she'd gradually stopped going. Maybe I'll go back," she murmured. There was something in her voice, a slight easing of the tension she'd been carrying. That weekend, she pulled out an old cardboard box from the closet. Inside were old worksheets and lesson plans from her teaching days, and a drawing that Emily had made when she was in elementary school. It was a picture of her mother standing in front of a chalkboard, holding a piece of chalk. And below it, in childish lettering, were the words, "My mom is the best teacher." When Eleanor picked up that drawing, her hand trembled slightly. She whispered, barely audible, "She used to be so proud of me." The words weren't directed at anyone, but in that moment, something shifted within her. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness either. It was just a certainty. I don't have to stay where I'm not wanted. That night, she wrote the final line in her diary. Being someone's mother was a joy, but I won't be someone's excuse. When she closed the diary, there was a flicker of resolve in her eyes. The sky was especially blue that morning. As Eleanor Johnson left her home in the suburbs of Chicago, she carefully held a wrapped package in her hands. Margaret Johnson, carrying a carefully wrapped package, made her way through the bustling streets of Chicago. Inside was a matcha birthday cake, baked with love the night before. The subtle aroma of green tea filled the air, mingling with the scent of a handwritten card nestled beside it. "Happy 8th birthday, Lily," the card read in her own familiar scrawl. I want to surprise her, Margaret thought. She's going to love it. After navigating the city's train lines for nearly 2 hours, Margaret arrived at an upscale apartment building in Chicago's Gold Coast neighborhood. It was just past noon. She pressed the buzzer. After a few seconds, the door swung open, revealing her daughter, Emily, in full makeup. "Mom?" Emily said, a look of surprise on her face. "I wasn't expecting you. What brings you here?" "I wanted to surprise Lily on her birthday," Margaret explained. "I baked her a cake. It's matcha flavored. Her favorite." She held out the package wrapped in a floral cloth. Emily took the package, disappeared into the kitchen for a moment, and returned with a slightly strained expression. "Mom, I'm sorry, but we've been feeding the kids only organic food these days. And besides, isn't the butter and flour that you use the cheap kind? What if Lily has an allergic reaction? We can't take any chances." With that, Emily opened the garbage bag and tossed the cake, box and all, straight in the trash. But the word caught in Margaret's throat. She had spent the entire night carefully whisking the batter, baking the cake to a perfect golden hue, and decorating it with strawberries, just as Lily had loved when she was a toddler. "Allergies?" Margaret managed to say. "But Lily has never had any allergies." "Mom, times have changed," Emily said, her voice sharp. "Don't think that homemade is best these days. Safety comes first." "Parenting isn't as simple as it used to be." Margaret couldn't find a reply. She simply stood there, silent and still. Then, she noticed the family photos lined up on the living room wall. Not a single one included her. "Where's Lily?" Margaret asked. "She's at a test prep center. Today's a practice exam. She's only in 3rd grade, but her whole future depends on academics. We can't waste time with parties and celebrations." "I see," Margaret said quietly. She turned, put on her shoes, and said, "I'll come by again soon," before stepping into the elevator. No one said thank you. No one said, "I'm glad you came." And no one noticed the tremor in her back as she turned away. On the train ride home, Margaret sat silently, pulling another card from her bag. It was the card she had planned to give to Lily with the cake. "Dear Lily, when you were little, you tried a cake I made and said, 'This is the best in the world.' Your smile at that moment is one of my greatest treasures. I wanted you to taste that happiness again. Happy birthday, my sweet granddaughter." Margaret folded the letter on her lap. As she placed it back in her bag, she whispered to herself, "I won't try to surprise anyone anymore." There were no tears in her eyes, only a distant, quiet gaze. The heart of the woman who had always worn a smile mask had just made a new decision. That night, back in her own small apartment, Margaret opened her diary and wrote, "Today my voice didn't tremble. Today I didn't smile. Today I chose not to back down quietly. Yes, this is the first step. I'm going to get myself back." And on the next page, she wrote, largely and clearly, "I won't allow it anymore." It was just another ordinary evening. Margaret Johnson had come to visit her daughter's high-rise apartment in downtown Chicago, with the intention of celebrating her granddaughter's birthday. But that evening, she was far from welcomed. Instead, she found herself quietly sipping tea in the living room, feeling more isolated than ever. It was supposed to be her granddaughter Lily's birthday party, but there were no decorations, no festive atmosphere, just a regular, unremarkable dinner. The table was set with delivered pizza and a grocery store cake. Lily, who had just turned 8, sat alone, absorbed in her tablet, completely oblivious to her grandma's presence. Margaret's daughter, Emily, and her husband were engrossed in work-related conversations, barely glancing at her. "Lily, happy birthday. I brought a card, just a little something." She started to speak, but Emily cut her off. "Mom, can I talk to you for a minute?" There was a hint of irritation in her voice. "To be honest, I was a little caught off guard by your visit today. Lily has tutoring, and we have a packed schedule." "Oh, I see. I'm sorry, dear. I just wanted to see Lily." Even as Margaret spoke, Emily's eyes remained cold. Later, Margaret overheard Emily scolding Lily in the kitchen. "You're skipping your studies again. When are you going to learn?" The tone was so harsh that Margaret couldn't help but intervene. "You don't have to scold her so much. Children need a safe and secure environment to grow up in." The atmosphere in the room instantly changed. Emily turned around, her voice sharp. "Seriously, Mom. Don't act like you're the expert. Times have changed. I'm doing the best I can. Grandma's wisdom doesn't work anymore." Margaret was momentarily speechless, but Emily didn't stop there. "Besides, do you think parenting is so easy? Lily has had asthma for 3 years now. Did you even know that?" "Of course not, because you haven't been here." Her words were like knives. "You haven't been here." That much was true. But Margaret had been working in the suburbs and sending approximately $500 every month, writing letters and always trying to support them from afar. But she finally realized that none of her efforts had made any difference. She glanced over at Lily, who was sitting nearby. The little girl looked up from her tablet, took a step back, and asked her mother, "Mommy, who is this lady?" In that moment, something inside Margaret Johnson quietly shattered. "I'm just a nameless stranger to this child." Her hands began to tremble. She couldn't speak, yet no tears came. She had been confronted with her own helplessness. That night, she quietly made her way home. Switching trains from Grand Central Station to the local line for Westchester County, her mind was a blur. The scenery outside the window meant nothing to her. But one phrase kept repeating itself in her mind. "Kindness is meaningless in a place where it isn't wanted. My goodwill was nothing more than interference. And today, I stopped being a mother." Back in her apartment, she pulled a box out of the closet. Inside were dozens of letters she had written to Lily but never sent. Holding them close, she gently touched each one, whispering, "It doesn't matter if they never arrive. The fact that I wrote them means my love existed." Then, on the last page of her diary, she quietly wrote, "I won't allow it anymore." The reality of not being needed by someone, that truth alone was more than enough to silence me. The next morning, Eleanor headed to the nearest courthouse. In her purse were certain documents and a quiet resolve. The winter in Wisconsin brings a slightly colder wind than Chicago. But that morning, Eleanor Johnson's steps were as quiet and strong as ever. She was dressed in a business suit, with lightly applied makeup. Her appearance was almost too careful for someone heading to administrative procedures, but it was her way of marking a turning point. First, she went to the local bank she had been using for many years. Standing at the counter, she presented her savings passbook and trust agreement, saying calmly, "Please cancel this trust account entirely. Remove the beneficiary designation as of today." The teller looked momentarily surprised, but quickly sensed that the customer's will was unwavering, and silently began reviewing the documents. That $400,000. It was the result of decades of teaching, her retirement fund, savings, Social Security, everything accumulated over the years. Previously, the contract was made with the thought, "I want to leave it to my daughter in case of an emergency." But now, things were different. Unappreciated, unwanted. Now that she realized that the money was binding her sense of self-worth, there was no option but to release it. Next, she headed to the family court. In her hand was a document, an inheritance waiver form. She quietly handed the envelope to the young female clerk who attended to her at the window. "This is my decision." The clerk looked through it, confirming, "You are waiving all inheritance to your daughter. Is that correct?" Eleanor Johnson nodded without hesitation. "Yes, I am no longer anyone's mother. There was neither anger nor resentment in those words. There was only a calm recognition of the facts, and a dignified choice. From there, she went to a local children's home in the city. It was a place where she had heard a former student of hers was working. I apologize for the suddenness of this. I have a house in this town. It's a small house. If it wouldn't be too much trouble, would you allow me to donate it to this facility? The director, taken aback, was initially speechless, but seeing the serious look in her eyes, immediately straightened up. Why to us? Eleanor smiled faintly. I decided today that I don't want to leave anything to people I'm connected to by blood. But if it can become someone's place to belong, I feel like that would be the greatest offering. Then she continued. I once thought I was betrayed by my families, but I was wrong. It was continuing to have expectations that made me suffer the most. That night, after returning home, she sat at her desk, took out stationery, and wrote a letter to her longtime legal advisor. The contents of the letter quietly but sharply spoke of her inner self. Dear Mr. Thompson, I hope this letter finds you well. This is Eleanor Johnson. Today, I completed all procedures for the cancellation of inheritance and trust. I would like to reiterate my request that none of my assets be passed on to my daughter in the future. I have stopped exhausting myself as someone's mother. The word loneliness may sound cruel at times, but it's much better to be alone than to be belittled by others. I would appreciate it if you could ensure that this will is legally respected. Sincerely, Eleanor Johnson. After finishing the letter, she looked in the mirror for the first time in a while. She saw a reflection of herself with a somewhat softened expression. This is right. This is a choice for myself. And after writing today's date on a page in her diary, she left one line. Today, I reclaimed myself. In the silence of the room, only those words radiated undeniable strength. Nestled in the mountains of Colorado, there's a quaint retirement home. In a room in that building, perched on a hill, Carol Henderson lived quietly. It was the spring of her 67th year when she let go of everything and came here. Almost a year had passed since then. Every morning, Carol would fold her futon herself, finish cleaning, and then head out with a small backpack. Her destination was the nearby Children's Support Center. It was a place where children who had lost their parents or couldn't go home, for various reasons, gathered. There she held language arts classes 3 times a week. The stroke order of letters, how to construct sentences, how to use polite language, and, above all, to write about people's feelings with care. It was a time when the passion she had felt as a teacher was rekindled. One day, a boy wrote a letter. To Grandma, you're not really my grandma, but this is the first time I've felt like there's someone who really sees me. Thank you. When Carol received that letter, quiet tears welled up in her eyes. Grandma? She never thought that word could sound so gentle. Their room was simple. A bed, a shelf, books, and a photograph on the wall. It was a photo from when her daughter was little, the two of them baking a cake together. Her daughter, wearing an apron, was laughing and sprinkling flour everywhere. Beside her, a younger version of herself was smiling too. And below that photo, there was a small plaque. I was once everything to someone. But when I was seen as a burden, I let go. Because I finally realized that loving isn't about obeying. At first, the staff around her called her Ms. Inzi Henderson, the former principal. But now, everyone affectionately called her Carol. Her words are so kind. She's the first person who's ever listened to me. The children, too, would come to her saying, Grandma Carol, look at this. I brought my language arts homeworks today. All of that was building a new form of family with those who weren't family. At night, while reading a book alone in her room, she would suddenly think of the distant past. I wonder how my daughter is doing now. I wonder if my grandchildren are growing up healthy. Those thoughts were something she thought she had let go of. But she couldn't completely forget them. That's why she thought, if, someday, they even slightly think, I'm sorry, then I'm sure I won't be angry anymore. On the last page of her diary, she wrote, Forgiving someone isn't for that person's sake, but an act to lighten your own heart. I'm not living with hatred anymore. I'm just quietly living as myself. And what appears on the screen is a room in a small retirement home with a view of the mountains. On the wall, that photo is still hanging. Below it, a handwritten message. Love doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be genuine. What are you telling the important people in your life? Perhaps, with just a single thank you, you can save someone from loneliness. Share your stories in the comments section below. True love doesn't have to be perfect. It starts with genuine heart-to-heart conversations. Thank you for watching. Next time, we'll meet again with another story of someone who became a light for someone else. Remember, even a simple thank you can save someone from deep loneliness. Reach out, connect, and let your appreciation be known. Genuine kindness makes all the difference.